All right, we are here and streaming, getting ready to record a new episode of a new show. I'm just going to check to make sure that the stream is actually streaming. It is at least on YouTube. Before we start, I threw in the title of the show as Legend Lore because that's what occurred to me, 30 minutes ago when I started throwing the episode together, throwing the script together. I am open to whatever names we want to call it, but that's sort of my placeholder name.
I like it, actually.
All right. Well, we'll stick with that for now until somebody listens to it and then hops in the Discord and tells us the 500 better names they've got, and then we can change it from there if we want to. Unless Tracy's got a better idea.
No, not at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. Let me actually open the stream, so if anybody puts anything in the chat, I'll see it. All right, then. I suppose, I don't know that we have opening theme music picked out for it or not, but I guess Sam can either do that or tell me he wants me to find something. Either way is good with me. And let's go from there. Are we ready?
Sure.
Awesome.
This episode of The Tome Show is brought to you by patrons like you. Over at patreon.com/The Tome Show, you can join in for as little as $1 a month. Welcome to The Tome for a new series we're tentatively calling Legend Lore. This series is a spin-off of a Tome Show episode we did about building adventures from monster lore with Rob Hinsu and Dan Dillon back in episode number 392. And so we're going to kind of follow that format more or less, but as we continue this series, who knows? Maybe it'll evolve and change and we'll turn it into what we want it to be. So we're going to record this every other month opposite the book club. So you'll get a few of these episodes every year and hopefully enjoy it. That said, I am not hosting this show by myself. We have 3 hosts for the episode. Myself, Jeff Greiner, as well as Tracy Hurley. Tracy, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Tracy Hurley, a longtime co-host of the Tome Show, and I've done freelancing before, so hopefully this will all work out okay.
Yeah, I say you've written some adventures before.
Yeah, and then I have my own 10-year-old goblin, so
Yeah.
who's getting into D&D. So
who's getting into D&D as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll come up with some good adventure ideas that you can steal and run for him.
Yeah, definitely.
And then also joining us as our third host for this series is Ismael Alvarez, who you know from being on just about everything that the Tome Show has released at some point or another, right?
Yeah, frequent contributor to Behind the DM Screen. Happy to substitute when I can.
Yeah, I think you're on probably Behind the DM Screen more than anybody else per year, other than maybe me. So
sounds about right.
Yeah. But you've also been on regular Tome Show episodes and done a lot of other things. I don't know if you've ever been brought into Edition Wars. That's another one of our more popular shows. Although I also have not been invited to Edition Wars, so
Fair.
It's a pretty prestigious group.
I don't think I've been on one yet, no.
No. We did do a crossover episode once between some other Tome Show series and Edition Wars, as I recall, and we did that together. But yeah, so like I said, generally there's going to be 3 hosts for this, but we're also going to bring in one guest to join us for each episode. But we thought, hey, this is the first episode. Let's just stick with the 3 of us, sort of kick the cobwebs off this idea, knock out the dings and see if we can get something smooth going before we start bringing other people on and embarrass ourselves. So it's just the 3 of us this time. The idea of this series is it came originally from looking at the extensive look we're doing at the 2024 Monster Manual and how scant the provided lore is, and the idea of, boy, if you wrote an adventure based off of just that lore from just that book, would you even end up with a creature that is recognizable based on the lore from other editions or other books or whatever? And so that's the idea, is that we're going to look at the lore. We're going to pick one book. We're going to pick one monster from that book. We're going to look at the stat block and the lore from that monster. And then we're going to build an adventure following the 11 steps that were created by the professionals in that original Tome Show episode, number 392. Sound like a plan? I see nods, yes. They both muted themselves for the streams, but yeah. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is figure out what monster book we're going to pull from for this episode. Given that the first episode, the original episode, was pulled from the 2024 Monster Manual, and that's where the inspiration for the show came from, I'm going to say, why don't we go ahead and do the 2024 Monster Manual? Unless there's any objections, I can run over to my shelf around the corner here and grab anything going back to second edition if we want to.
No, the 2024 Monster Manual I think sounds good, and it certainly would be very recognizable to I presume most of our audience.
Okay, so we'll start there, and then maybe in the future we'll expand out and experiment and try some other things. The next step is figuring out what monster we're going to create an adventure based on. I think the way we should generally do this is that one of us will pick a handful of options, and then the other two hosts will sort of start to narrow it down, and whoever the guest is will sort of pick the final monster. They'll get the last choice. If it's okay with the two of you, I asked my oldest child for some inspiration, and I have a list of 5 that you two can narrow down. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay. His inspiration was he wanted it to be an episode of relatively low CR creatures. So the options that I selected are Goblin, Kobold, Gnoll, Zombie, and Imp. So those are 5 options, and I'll let the two of you talk it through and narrow it down to 1.
The one that I gravitate towards just from that list is the Gnoll. I think they're the ones that vary the most from edition to edition. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people feel very strongly about they like their version of their Gnoll. But I would be curious to see what is in the 2024 Monster Manual to draw from, and what can we extrapolate. But I'm also open to the other options.
I'm fine with doing the Gnoll. I think Jeff has some thoughts, but I'm not sure.
we have already recorded our episode that includes the Gnoll of the extensive Monster Manual review. So let me find the Gnoll entry. And I have my Monster Manual in front of me here, so I'll get to the Gnoll entry, and I'll be ready to go with that as we get to it. There it is. All right. So there's our Gnoll page with like an assembled team of Avengers Gnolls charging into battle. Okay, so Tracy was on the episode with Rob and Dan. Ish, I imagine, has probably heard it.
Yes, I have.
But I imagine none of us have memorized the 11 steps that Rob and Dan crafted with us. So I went back to that script and copy and pasted it into this script for this episode. So I thought it might be helpful to do a read through and a reminder before we actually walk through the steps and build something. Step 1 is read to the monster. Step 2, identify key concepts either from the lore or the stat block of the monster. Step 3, how do those concepts play into whatever setting we're placing our adventure in? 4, identify the purpose of the encounter or adventure that we're writing, because when you're focusing on one monster, it could really just be a setup and a single encounter, or it could be more. 5, either subvert or reinforce expectations when it comes to what you're going to run into in your story that you're telling. 7, figure out what the villain is trying to do. 8, how does what the villain is trying to do, create conflict? 9, figure out how the characters get involved. 10, think about how they're going to be able to resolve the conflict. And 11, make sure that the story and the lore is being told throughout the adventure. So figure out how we're going to weave all that story and lore into the story that we're creating. Are you typing all these? Is that why? Is that what I'm hearing?
It just helps my brain.
Yep, I can send it to you in our Discord as well, if that would help.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that would work too.
Trace, would it help? Oh, you have the script in front of you.
Yeah.
So you've got them. There, you should have them in the Discord chat now-ish. So those are the steps. Now, one of the things we discovered, even in the very first time doing this with Dan and Rob, is that we didn't necessarily follow the steps in order. Sometimes we were working on one step and realized, oh, we're already seeing ideas for something, 3 steps down the line or whatever. And so we didn't. They're not necessarily sequential. Although it definitely seems like steps 1 and 2 generally come first. Read it first and then figure out sort of the key concepts in the lore and in the stat block. So do we all have the 2024 Monster Manual entry for Knowles handy? Or okay. Tracy, do you have it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I think the first step is read the monster. So I'm going to go ahead and the nice thing about the 2024 Monster Manual is, I guess, nice thing, for the purposes of this, is that the lore is very, very short. So I'm just going to read it, if that's cool. As we pull from other books, we may discover that reading an entire page of text is not going to be feasible, to get into the lore. But we don't have a whole page of text. We have a handful of paragraphs. So in the 2024 Monster Manual, although y'all are co-hosting, do one of you want to read the Knoll lore entries? I've been talking a lot. So.
No, I mean, I'm happy to. I've got the Knoll Warrior, and I'm assuming that that's essentially what all there is of the Knoll in the Monster Manual, or am I missing any other?
So each stat block has its own paragraph of lore, and there's also an overarching Knoll stat or lore paragraph.
All right,
so there's a Knoll paragraph, and then there's a Knoll Warrior paragraph, and then a Pack Lord paragraph, and a Thing of Yenogu, and a demoniac. I think that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Demoniac paragraph.
All right.
So as you're pulling that up, Tracy, did you want to read it? Or you want me to?
I can read it. So the general paragraph is: the first gnolls arose from hyenas that fed on flesh tainted by the abyss. Their corruption and violence delighted the demon lord Yenogu, who encouraged their numbers and spread them across the multiverse. Ever since, gnolls have been the cackling servants of Yenogu, existing to cause ruin and to feast on what remains. Which is definitely how we have seen gnolls through the ages in D&D.
Right. That is a. It has often been part of lore that occasionally gnolls worship Yenogu, but it is a new invention of 2024 that's their origin, and that they're all connected to Yenogu. But we're going to base it off of the lore in this book, so we won't worry too much about that. All right. Does somebody want to read the Knoll Warrior?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay.
Knoll warriors crave endless slaughter, but quickly grow bored with prey they kill and the treasures they plunder. Nevertheless, they're enraged by the thought of anyone else having what's theirs, compelling them to ruin what they can't take with them.
That's interesting. Are you reading it off of D&D Beyond?
Yes.
Okay. They must have edited
it.
I think they edited the text because in the book I got the physical book, and in the physical book from when it was first published, it's compelling them to despoil what they can't take with them.
Oh, interesting.
So they changed the despoil to whatever you said.
Ruin.
Ruin. So I'll read the next one. Knoll Pack Lord, rising above other gnolls with their viciousness and physical prowess. Knoll Pack Lords terrorize weaker gnolls into their service. These brutes drive other gnolls to acts of great violence, then claim the best of the servants' spoils. Tracy, you got the next?
Yeah, Null Fang of Yenogu. Null is possessed by demonic vestiges of the demon lord Yenogu. Fangs of Yenogu direct the chaos of Null packs. Along the way, these fanatics seek grisly omens from Yenogu and strive to interpret the demon lord's vicious goals.
Okay. And last but not least is the Null Demoniac. Ish, you got that one?
Yes, I do. The Null demoniacs are berserkers that arise from Nulls who've ritualistically fed on the flesh corrupted by the abyss. Now embodying the ruinous hunger of Yenogu, these Nulls stow themselves into battle, heedless of odds or their own survival. Rampaging demoniacs even devour other Nulls in their wild frenzies.
It immediately strikes me as interesting that the Null demoniacs are Gnolls that have fed on flesh corrupted by the abyss, but in the original lore, Gnolls themselves are hyenas that have been corrupted by feeding on flesh corrupted by the abyss. So I guess there's two evolutions of Gnolls, and you evolve based on eating corrupted abyss flesh.
Yes.
Okay. So as we look through both the lore and the stat blocks, what are sort of the key concepts that stand out to us that sort of define the Gnoll?
It seems that where you will more likely find Gnolls is as rampaging warbands or like essentially bandits, just depending on the scope of what they'll be doing. And more often than not, it's just going to be about violence and basically the taking of wealth so that they can either accumulate it or destroy it.
Well, yeah. Interestingly, like they're not depicted as necessarily like greedy or wealth hungry or whatever, right? They might be bandits, but they don't actually care about stealing your stuff. They're not there to rob you. They're there to just for carnage and slaughter.
They kind of remind me of like a good Mad Max movie where you have just the wild people driving cars on a wasteland. And why do they do that? Because they have fun killing other people and just making sure they don't have good stuff. Maybe not even necessarily to take it, but just to deny it to other people.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. They're not interested in robbing you, but they're interested in making sure you don't have it. That whatever wealth or comfort you have, you can't. I think it's a common thread in the lore from this book that Gnolls are connected to Yenogu. They were created. It doesn't say that Yenogu was responsible for the origin of the Gnoll, but the Gnolls were created, and it pleased Yenogu, and he sort of became their patron and spread them through the multiverse. If we believe that D&D has a multiverse. That's neither here nor there.
I also wonder if in the course of considering like our adventure, would we maybe turn this on its head and say maybe Yenogu did not create the Gnolls or did not propagate the Gnolls, but that the inverse happened and Gnolls were created, and then all of a sudden because they got so populous, maybe they created Yenogu. Maybe they begat Yenogu in some weird like.
Now I like that idea, and that would subvert expectations, which is our number 5, or potentially number 5. That said, we are supposed to be building an adventure based on the lore we have.
Okay. Oh, and that's okay. I was kind of going off the idea maybe it was a little more vague, but no, you're right.
It does explicitly say that Yenogu was responsible for spreading them around.
Yeah, and I guess what are our limits in terms of like, because there is lore around Yenogu, but not in the monster manual, right? 2020.
Yeah, I suppose.
Like for instance, in the Baldur's Gate book, they have about him, and they give a little bit more info on how the descent into Avernus, of how the Gnolls were created.
I suppose if we want to consider Yenogu lore, I'd be open to that if that's what people want to do. But when it comes to the Gnolls, I'd like to try to stick to the lore that's in this book.
Sure, it reinforces it. Is all I would say.
Okay, and that may be a little bit of a. I might be splitting hairs a little bit, because they are so tied together in this version of the lore. But
yeah,
yeah,
and essentially all it says is that that when he hunted across the material plane, hyenas followed in his wake, and those that ate his kills became gnolls, emulating their master's ways.
So he didn't create the gnolls, but he was still kind of responsible for the creation of the gnolls, and that's not inconsistent with the lore in the Monster Manual.
Yes.
Right.
One of the other things that this original steps process noted, though, is let's make sure we also look at the stat blocks and see if there's themes that we see in the stat blocks that we want to pull out. I think the stat blocks for the gnolls actually do a pretty nice job of bringing out this idea that they're berserkers. They all have this rampage ability. Every single one of them is a barbarian that flies into rage whenever the combat starts, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
If just real quick before we go into the stat blocks, one thing I would pull from the lore is that cackling servants line.
Oh.
So hyenas, I mean, themselves are very well known for their laughing barks or whatever, but commonly when they're portrayed in movies and stuff, there's a way that you can. Sometimes it's that you hear them before you see them, and that builds the tension. So you might want to have this in a place where they can kind of get an element of surprise, or it can be that they don't do that laughing at first, and they sneak up closer and closer. So those are just two options to think of as you build it out.
It also occurs to me. So one of the I'll say controversial calls that they made in the 2024 Monster Manual that shows up in the stat blocks is that gnolls are not humanoids. They're not monsters. They're not whatever. They're fiends. And that may actually, as much as there may be issues with okay, so I can't cast sleep on a gnoll. That's lame. Or I can't cast charm person on a gnoll, which is kind of lame. But it does potentially present us with an opportunity. Because of the way that they're depicted, gnolls are a force of destruction, right? It's hard to imagine a specific plot that they have that isn't just let's tear things up and destroy. That's kind of their role. But it occurs to me, maybe the gnolls were summoned because of their fiends, and you can summon fiends. And so maybe the gnolls have been summoned by somebody, and they've been summoned in order to create that chaos and destruction, and then that's serving the real villain's purpose. The gnolls are the threat, but really they're a wave of destruction being unleashed by the real villain. And if we want to skip ahead a little bit, which we're told is okay, we could even subvert the expectations, right? We could reinforce the expectations. Gnolls are these savage creatures because that's the big threat that the adventurer has to deal with. But maybe we also simultaneously subvert the expectations, and we have a neutral evil instead of a chaotic evil, cleric or warlock gnoll who is the villain behind the whole thing. Or is that too far?
No, I like that. And I just had this kind of wacky idea, and I think it cleaves into that. But you tell me if this sounds like it's going too far afield. So let's say that you have an area that just has hyenas. Let's just say there's dozens to hundreds of hyenas in the area where the adventure takes place, and someone summons a gnoll pack lord, whether intentionally or accidentally, and then the gnoll pack lord, again, either intentionally or accidentally, starts creating gnolls out of these hyenas. And you get this weird, almost zombie film where instead of it's one zombie infecting people, it's this pack lord infecting hyenas, and you're trying to stem this sudden invasion of gnolls.
I like that. And that could connect to this. The third step is, how do these concepts apply to the setting? You're starting to define the setting. We're in some sort of a setting where hyenas are commonplace. So I'm picturing some sort of an Egypt-like desert setting, or the steppes, of northern Africa, or parts of Asia or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the setting that we're thinking about, since that's where we're going to find the hyenas a lot?
Yeah, and I think that would cleave pretty well into like, okay, so hyenas and gnolls go hand in hand. So
Mm-hmm.
like we should mix them a little bit more. So where there's the expectation of like, okay, there's hyenas, there could also be gnolls, and the gnolls themselves would kind of fit in, because they could exist anywhere, but it makes sense for them also to like naturally exist to some degree in a place where hyenas just live.
Does that work as a concept for you, Tracy, to think about this sort of African-inspired or Egyptian-inspired setting?
Sure.
And then there's lots of hyenas. I like the idea that it wasn't necessarily like having a gnoll mastermind is maybe subverting the expectations to the point that it doesn't fit into what a gnoll is. But I like the idea of a pack lord was accidentally summoned, or maybe a Fang of Yanogu if we want to go a little bit more badass or whatever. But either way, a higher CR gnoll was accidentally summoned amongst this pack of gnolls, killed whoever accidentally summoned them, and then used their body, corrupted their body with the abyss, and fed the gnolls on it, creating his pack of gnolls. I like that.
And I think there'd probably be an element where most groups would want to they'd want to save the hyenas. They'd recognize that the hyenas aren't evil, but that they would be corrupted. So there would be this kind of race against time. How many hyenas can we save by preventing this from happening? Maybe even like a little conservationist thing. So
maybe the larger concept here is that our pack lord or Fang, depending on how powerful we want to get, is raising a small army of gnolls by moving from pack to pack and converting all the hyenas to gnolls. And so there's this race involved in it. Like, we got to stop them before they get to the next pack and add 50 more gnolls to their numbers or whatever.
Right. There could even be like a weird timer built into the setting where it's like, okay, if you take a long rest, you add 3d6 more gnolls to whatever you have to deal with.
Yeah, every time they take a rest, the pack gets a little bigger. Which is interesting, because we're quickly going from, like, we chose a relatively low CR creature. The Gnoll Warrior is a 1/2 CR creature. Even the Pack Lord is only a CR2. But you're talking about packs of them, right? You're talking about what could grow to very large numbers. And so it could, like, it seems to me like this may be an example of how to take a relatively low CR creature and use it as a major threat for a high tier 1, low tier 2 sort of adventure.
Yes. And you could even scale it down if someone wanted to go a lot more like low level, like levels 1 to 3, and say, instead of, there's hundreds of hyenas or whatever, you can just say there's the one pack. You can almost treat it like a cattle run. It's like, okay, this pack is just migrating from point A to point B. You have to stop this pack lord before it gets to that pack.
Yeah. If you want to do the low CR version, then I would say it's a pack lord. I'm actually more tempted thematically to make the summoned one be a Fang of Yanogu.
I do like
that because the Fang of Yanogu already has this abyss connection, and it feels like it could create the abyssal corruption that then allows the hyenas to feed and create more gnolls. Whereas a pack lord is just a more powerful gnoll and doesn't really have that abyssal ability, power, if you will.
Yes.
And then I like the idea that, like, you could build in encounters, like, okay, if you run into some gnolls, you figure out the plot, you start chasing after the main pack or whatever, and occasionally you may run into a pack of gnolls that are actually fighting off a gnoll, what do I call it? demoniac. That's what I call it. Because the demoniac was accidentally created, and it's just so savage that it's threatening the whole pack or whatever. But now then the party shows up, and so now they got to deal with the demoniac as well, and that's a real challenge because it's CR8, but the rest of the gnolls are kind of on their side at the beginning of the fight. So that feels like there's potential here to do a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, there's like a whole range of things you can really toy with, a lot of toggles.
Yeah. So I feel like we're reinforcing expectations on gnolls in terms of they're a sort of a savage force of nature that wants nothing but to grow and propagate and destroy. Yeah. Since their main sort of motivation is to destroy, which we've also defined number 7. What is the villain trying to do? And I think it easily creates conflict in number 8 because they're spreading and destroying, and the local villages or whatever are being threatened by all the destruction. You know, it could start as little as the pack went through last night and ate all the cattle in town, and now we're all going to starve, and if only the heroes could come and help us or whatever. And then you find out this larger issue going on.
Yeah, like that.
And to kind of build on that too, if you did pick the Fang, they're seeking grisly omens and strive to interpret the Demon Lord's vicious goals. But the thought there is that you can also build off of that. So maybe it came into this area. So maybe it was summoned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once it's there, it's like looking for to reinterpret everything else going on into what its goals are. So these things could start looking like omens, or I don't know, or you could eventually use that to segue to another adventure.
Mm-hmm. And I can see like the reason that this Fang of Yonogu is doing all of these things is because it believes it's interpreting the omens that it gets every time it kills, you know, non-gnolls that wander into its pack. They slaughter him, and then he does a reading in the entrails of the people that they've slaughtered, and sees that Yonogu is pleased and that he should continue growing and propagating and whatever.
Yeah. And on that timer idea, the other thing you can do here is that as this is going on, you know, it gets more and more just full of filth or whatever, like in terms of its the place itself is holding the memories of what's going on and so
the gore and the violence are seeping into the land.
Yeah, and I used that in an adventure once that I wrote for a small publisher, where, you know, and that lasted hundreds of years later.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the type of person that likes to have the storyline like continue even between campaigns, you could come back to this later, and you know the den that they've created has all of this horror seeped into it.
Yeah. And I like the idea, like as they're hunting the pack, they occasionally run into like the remains of the violence and from wherever they previously were. But they, amongst those remains, they find like these circles of blood and entrails from the Fang that has been sort of doing rituals to read the omens and to corrupt the flesh and then create more gnolls.
And that's kind of in their stat block too. Like most of the weapons they have seem to be made of bone, specifically of the things that they eat. It's pretty common to just see their stat blocks and understand that they're eating what they kill, no matter if it's sapient or not. So they're probably eating people and livestock and what have you, and then making things out of their bones. My thought was, how did the characters get involved is probably, if you want to go low stakes to start, livestock hasn't just been killed and eaten, but like ritualistically so a farmer might have found like one of these sites where the entrails were arranged in a certain pattern and bones have been carved, and probably prayers of Yonogu have been put in there. The farmers probably have no idea what any of that means, but they're like, this is weird. And that's how the characters get involved.
Yeah, I'm imagining there's a minimum of like I'm imagining there's a minimum of 4 encounters, but this could grow to be a much bigger sort of adventure as well. But at the least, I think you have 4 encounters. You run into the village and the farmers are talking about, this thing has happened. Maybe the local sage, the former wizard adventurer, is there and investigating and offers to them some magic item or whatever in exchange for hunting these gnolls down and can sort of give us the exposition and explain a little bit about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Can see the ritually sacrificed or the entrails and blood symbols and whatever, and explain, that means a fang's around, or whatever. And then that's sort of your patron that's going to pay you to hunt after him in case that's what your party needs to be motivated to move forward. And then you chase after him and you run into some stragglers, you fight some gnolls, you keep chasing after him, you find a larger pack, and they're fighting one of their own, the demoniac, that you temporarily team up with a pack of gnolls to fight off the demoniac and go from there. And then you actually get to the actual pack. How big is the actual pack? Depends on how high level your party is and how many times they've rested. It could be as small as they started with 12, and every time that you take a long rest, you add D4, or it could be you start with 50, and every time you rest, you add a D20, or so.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to add an element too, because like a lot of what gnolls do is to corrupt. So you could have probably for like the low to mid scope of what we're trying to do, the gnolls are trying to take over like the local like water source. And I'm sure you've seen the same nature documentaries that I have where there's a water source, everyone goes there, like the lions drink with the gazelles and whatnot. And so the gnolls could have this idea of like, we're going to corrupt that, and then that's just going to throw all of the ecosystem out the window, and that's going to be good for us because that's what we want, and we'll just move on to the next one. So I could imagine, like, as long as it makes sense for like levels 1 through 6, I think, then that would be the climactic battle, is that you're either near to or at the watering hole, and that's where you have the big conflict before they befoul the water source.
And I could see, that tells me like we may have a minimum of sort of 4 encounters, but you could you could expand it to a bunch of others. Like you could do a lot of things with this. Like maybe the watering hole encounter is a whole other thing, right? And you drive them off or whatever, but the fang is still out there. And part of the pack is still out there or whatever. Or I'm imagining you could do the evil villain in the region or whatever is trying to use or manipulate the gnolls to create destruction of his enemies or whatever. So there's all kinds of extra little, like, you could make 4 encounters, but I think you could also do like 12 encounters in this story. And I think to get to the steps about like what is the purpose of this and why is this story worthwhile, which is steps 4 and 6 on our list. I think what we're creating is, it's interestingly, because you kind of hinted at this at the beginning, I think, Ish. We're kind of creating an adventure that's a little bit The Mummy, and it's a little bit a zombie story, right? It's kind of a zombie apocalypse. Like there's an endless wave of gnolls, but they're not undead. They're like this infernal force of nature and destruction. And you just have to stop the hurricane, so to speak.
Yes.
Cool. So we've also talked about 8. We know how the characters get involved. They for some reason or another, they've stumbled upon this village where the livestock and maybe a few people have been slaughtered in the night as the pack went through, and the sage is there to bring them in. Have we talked a little bit about how they could resolve the conflict? Is it just slowly hunt them down and then kill off the fang of Yanogu and end this cycle of growth?
I guess it partly depends on how we feel about gnolls. So if we only go by what's in the lore in 2024, right? We might have to kill them all. Or if we
Which is interesting because that's the exact sort of thing that generally 2024 is avoiding is
Right.
all of this species is evil, but the 2024 gnolls are fiends and are all chaotic evil.
Right. Or you could make a callback to older versions of gnolls and say really the problem is these specific types that are fiends and the rest are not.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about because that there's a little element of the do we subvert or reinforce expectations? We've done a lot of reinforcing the expectations of gnolls are savage forces of destruction. But boy, you could get to the end and do some interesting things of like, but maybe there's some of the gnolls that aren't,
Right.
or are fighting against their nature or whatever, and that could be an interesting for a long-term campaign at the end of this adventure. Is like, okay, but like once you killed the Fang of Yenogu and you've sort of calmed down the Yenogu influence on the gnolls, are they still a force of destruction? At the very least, it may end the threat of the pack because it's no longer going to grow, and then maybe they scatter because they don't have the leadership anymore.
Right.
After the Fang is destroyed, then the various pack lords that are left in the pack just sort of split off everybody else and go off and form smaller packs that aren't nearly as destructive.
If you wanted to get a little bit more friendly and kind of more in the vein of the 2024 approach, you could even go so far as to say if a gnoll has been created within, I don't know, 24, 48 hours, and you slay the Fang of Yenogu, they turn back into hyenas. And you can kind of tune that a little bit and say, okay, so these hyenas are back to being hyenas, but they're feral. Like even compared to other hyenas, they'll like attack things and they're more aggressive, but they're back to being hyenas, and so it feels like a little bit more of a win. Or I do know that I've had some players in the past where anything to do with animals is kind of like a very delicate topic, and so if they ever feel like, oh, animals came to harm in this imaginary sense, they would be really sad about it. You could just like completely go the 180 and just say, okay, they're all better now because you killed the Fang of Yenogu. But that there would be at least that ability to do it that way. And then of course the step in the other direction of that would be they stay as gnolls, but they're not as bloodthirsty, or they kind of go to the Four Winds.
Yeah, I mean, in as much as we're sticking with the lore that we have, I don't have I mean, one of our steps is potentially subverting expectations. So that's a little bit of like, we're going to stick with the lore that we have in the book, but also we're going to subvert the expectations of that lore, and maybe they're not all, there's that shades of gray at the end of the whole thing. And the idea, like normally, if I wanted to make something based on this lore, they become gnolls not because of the power of the Fang, but because of the eating of the flesh of abyssally corrupted flesh. But I don't hate the idea that this flesh was corrupted by the abyss by the Fang of Yenogu, and when that Fang is gone, then the corruption sort of leaks out of those that have only recently fed. It's a little bit like vampire rules, right? You kill the master and cure the minions or whatever.
Yes.
But it doesn't cure all of them. It cures just the ones that were recently created, and some of them still need to be are all still threats. So you can feel good about going off and killing monsters or whatever. I like that idea. And then you got to deal with the okay. Well, we saved these hyenas, and now they're just back to being hyenas, but they're also very aggressive, right? It's the issue of like, okay, you've had a dog, but that dog has now bitten somebody. They've tasted human flesh, and can we trust them now or whatever?
I like that too.
Yeah.
Well, you can never trust a hyena. We know that from lots of things.
Mostly the Lion King taught us that, right?
Yeah.
Can't trust hyenas because they're the villains in The Lion King.
I also know a lot of people who like gnolls as player characters, which, recent editions, including 2024, don't really cozy up to that idea, which is unfortunate. Like I do feel that, like, I think I had the same thing with Minotaurs, just as a small tangent, where I like Minotaurs as player characters, but then you see a lot of it's like, no, they're actually evil and they're tied to like a demon lord or whatever.
Baphomet.
Baphomet, yeah, thank you. I was trying to think of his name. But I think in the scope of what we're doing, like, there's no way around it. They're tied to Unogu, and that's the bounds that we're working in.
Yeah. Although, if you wanted to turn this into a Gnoll campaign, you could definitely do the Gnoll campaign of trying to start a faction of Gnolls that are doing the work to try to break away from Unogu or whatever, right? Which then starts to rhyme a little bit with is it some Warcraft lore where the orcs try to break away from the influence of the demon lords that they've been corrupted by or whatever over time.
Yeah,
my Warcraft lore is fairly weak, but I think that's a thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think when looking at this, I would caution against saying that you have to take all of the lore that's here.
Sure.
Because you could just as easily decide that you're gonna not do the fiend part. You don't care about that. You could make the gnolls how you want, but and you could even do it between them. So like maybe it's when you get to be a Fang or a Demonac that you end up taking on a lot more of that fiendishness part, but regular gnolls have a different story.
Yeah, no, I mean, generally speaking, I agree, absolutely. That's, I think, just good DMing advice, right? And good adventure writing advice. Part of what my curiosity in this series to explore is if you limit yourself to the lore that you have from one source, do you end up with a creature that still feels and looks like the creature that you've known for multiple editions of the game and whatever? I think other than that fiend thing, which is pretty instrumental to this adventure that we've sketched out, I think the gnolls as we've depicted them in this story hew pretty closely. Like they've always kind of been savage destroyers. No,
I don't think that's true. Because the gnolls, when I played in I think it was a second edition game. The way the DM presented gnolls was more like the almost like First Nations people of the plains.
Oh, that may be a setting specific depiction. I feel like the official lore, they've always been sort of savage killers or whatever in most depictions.
Right, but what you said was like what people played with, but when we talked about it in the episode, there were other people who had also had that same background with gnolls, and that's why the going really deep into the was so changing. Like it just felt weird. I'll be honest, that's how I felt during that episode. Was like, where did these people come from? Where did these gnolls come from?
Okay. I know. I go back to second edition. If you go back to like the original Baldur's Gate games, which was based on second edition, they were kind of savage killers there, but it may be very setting dependent on how they're depicted.
Well, yeah, and exactly what it like why they're killing and stuff might also be interesting.
Oh yeah. No, I think there's very interesting. If you are willing to diverge from the lore, and maybe that's an interesting conversation to have that we can bring into this is what kind of stories could we tell differently than the one we've sketched out if we're willing to change the lore? Because gnolls as analogs for indigenous American people, boy, that's a very interesting concept and different.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And I think that could be something that would potentially be brought into the adventure as well.
Mm-hmm.
What does being a null mean in this specific setting that we're kind of inventing for this? It's possible that like another kind of null existed for this weird invasion, and then all of a sudden these Yenogu nulls are showing up, and they're like the people in the setting are having their expectations subverted because they're like, we know
Mm-hmm.
these aren't the nulls we know.
Right. You could very easily, bring in this other depiction of gnolls as the people who are being terrorized, and not to go back to the orcs in Warcraft connection, or inspiration, but maybe that's some inspiration for this too. Is that maybe it's not even the hyenas that are being corrupted, but it's just the gnolls are being tainted and corrupted by the power of the Abyss and Yenogu, and you're trying to save them from that corruption. So yeah, you can bring in these other conceptions of gnolls from other depictions and do some very interesting things to further develop or tweak or change this adventure concept that we've sketched out.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason was that the gnolls were kind of like, again, going back to them being humanoids versus fiends,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the humanoids of that type of physical location. And so, yeah. I have no problem with them being merciless hunters or anything. Just
right. Sure. No. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we're working with the material that WotC wrote in the book, right? If that's not as nuanced as we would like, that's a very important conversation, and I think it's worth mentioning here as well.
Yeah, and I think even if we stuck to that, then you might want to pull out. But again, you could still stick with it for the Fang and the higher level ones, right? And then try to figure out, well, how far do you really keep with it for the base gnolls?
Oh yeah, no. If I was running this adventure, I would absolutely change the lore, right?
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be fiends in my game, because also that nerfs a bunch of spells too, and makes them not functional anymore. But
one thing I don't think we overly talked about was how much do you add additional gnolls, and we don't have, other than the warrior, so that's another interesting thing, right? Is that the only null stack, the lowest null stat block we get is a warrior, but are they all warriors then? How can you have a null that's not like? How can you just have a null?
So that's an. They're all warriors, yes, because in previous editions there was no null warrior. It was just the baseline null, and then everything else that sort of came after that. And in 2024, they've been trying to not just have a baseline stat block. They have a stat block of something that's weaker, but it's not just the baseline null, right? It's not like the stereotype of what that whole species is. So yeah, so yes, I guess in the adventure we've sketched out, I guess, and that's worth talking about. In my head, they all the new gnolls come out as warriors, except a small handful of them might be pack lords, and then occasionally you have a rare something screwed up, and we have the demoniac. So I guess if I'm figuring out the math in my head, like for every 12 null warriors that are created, one of them comes out as a pack lord, and for every 50 there's a demoniac or whatever. And I don't know if that math works out with the challenge ratings that we're working with and balancing the encounters that we've discussed. But
and for what it's worth, just I pulled up my first and second edition monstrous manuals, and the first two basically say that gnolls kind of travel in packs, and they have like women and children in dens and things like that, which I think is definitely not in line with what we've got. So I think we would have to decide based on this based on based on the current monster manual, if they're just like this, almost like a demonic plague, where
Right.
it doesn't matter, they're not forming societies, they're just this like force of nature, or if they will eventually become something like a society and have
And what we don't have from this lore is, can Nolds like breed true?
right.
Are they even capable of procreating that way, or is it just through the corruption of hyenas? At least in our storyline, like this scourge of gnolls has come up so quickly, it basically has to be corruption of hyenas, and that actually solves some problems of, we don't have to deal with the question of, okay, but what about the children and the caregivers and whatever? How do we deal?
Right.
How do we deal with the shades of gray with that? We can be a little bit more simplistic and say, oh well, this scourge of destruction that we have to deal with. Now, what happens when we get rid of the source of destruction and the corruption? That's an interesting question, and we can do interesting things with that as well, without having to go so far as to deal with the, okay, but what do you do with the kids?
Right.
Now, if our version of the adventure was, this is a problem that's been going on for years, then we might have to answer that question.
Or, taking it even one step further, if we're saying that there are like normal gnolls that are not demonically corrupted, but what if children got infected by this thing, and what do you do then? Because then you've got very upset, not demonic gnolls trying to argue, no, you should let me keep my demon kid, and then you're like, yeah, but that's just going to make things worse. And then you get into like the John Romero zombie movie, like what happens when someone's bit, and how do you deal with it in a way that is humane but also pragmatic.
Right. And that brings in a lot of shades of gray.
Yeah.
And so far our adventure hasn't been super gray at least until the conclusion, which, if that's what you want to do at your table, boy, we've had that discussion. Go ahead and take those ideas and run with it. But if you want to have something where there's a wave of destruction and you just want to go in and save the day, and have a simpler take on it, then there are dials and levers that you can pull to sort of tweak this to where you want it to be.
Yes.
Okay, I think we've hit all of the steps. We read the monster. We identified the key concepts. We talked about how those concepts apply to the setting. We've identified the purpose of the encounter, or the adventure. We've subverted or reinforced expectations. We've talked about why this story is worthwhile compared to other creatures. We figured out what the villain's trying to do, how that creates conflict, how the characters get involved, and how they resolve the conflict. And I think we've done a pretty good job of making sure that the story and the lore is woven throughout all of our steps and encounters. So those are the 11 steps. I think we have successfully talked about that. And then we continue talking for another 15 or 20 minutes about how to tweak and subvert and how you can adopt and adapt this concept of an adventure. Any other last thoughts on our Gnolls of Destruction adventure? That's what I've just tagged it in my head.
No, I think that this is pretty robust. Like, I could take this and run with it, and it would be either a really strong start of a campaign that would be very like demon influenced, like maybe running into the start of like a Out of the Abyss campaign, for instance, or Descent into Avernus, or what have you, or just to take it into its logical conclusion and say this is going to be about fighting a gnoll corruption until you find Yenogu and slay them for the betterment of the multiverse or whatever. But there's some really good stuff. Like, I think we really hit on some cool ideas.
Cool. Tracy, any last thoughts?
Don't be afraid to put extra gnolls in to just have them be sacrificed or killed, because multiple of the higher creatures say that they will just tear apart the weaker ones and stuff like that. So if you really want to dig into that, that's one way to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to depict the why the pack hasn't gotten too far out of hand, is that because they're self-destructive, they're chaotic evil, and that's sort of what chaotic evil is all about, is that it kind of feeds on itself a lot of times, and that's why they don't just the demon hordes don't take over all of the lower planes. So
love that.
All right. Well, this has been our first foray into the Legend Lore series on the Tome Show. I want to remind folks, if you want to support the show, you can go to the Tome Show's Patreon at patreon.com/Tome Show. And for as little as $1 a month, support what we're doing here and keep us going. I want to specifically thank our newest supporter, Dave Dalrymple, who joined us last month. Thanks to them and all of our other patrons for throwing us a little pittance to help us pay the bills. If you want to find us on the various social medias, first of all, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com, and you should definitely come and find us on Discord. If you need the link for that, you can find us on social media or shoot me an email at thetomeshow@gmail.com. If you want to find us on social media, you can find Ish. He is Elven Wizard King on which social medias are you hanging out on these days?
Mostly, I'm going to say it's about Twitter, Facebook, and Blue Sky. I think is really where I'm at.
Okay. And Tracy is Sarah Dark Magic on various social medias. Is that accurate?
Yes. Although mostly Blue Sky and maybe Instagram?
Okay. Are you Sarah Dark Magic on Instagram too?
I believe so.
I should check you out. I need to give you a follow. And I am Squatch, Squach. I don't post much of anything on any of the social medias other than our Discord these days. But if you send me a message and tag me in it, I will get a notification and come and see what we're talking about. And I think we're going to call that episode 1 of the show that is currently titled Legend Lore. Let us know what you think, and if you have a better idea for the name. Until then, get out there and game, guys. The end.
Yeah.
All right, and say goodbye to the stream.
Bye, stream.